Welcome to the Fight Podcast with Jake and Nikki Hamilton,
where we discuss the complexities of marriage and manhood through real, raw, personal stories.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Fight Podcast. This week, I had the privilege of interviewing one of my really good friends, Micheal Miller. We have been through a lot together. You're going to hear some of that, but he is currently running something called Dead Presidents Club. You definitely want to check it out on the social medias and the YouTubes and all the places you can check these things out. He's done a bunch of podcasts recently having to do around finances, what to do with your money management, but also how to do investments, even for guys like you and I maybe that don't know a ton about it. Micheal makes it super simple, and he is a great resource. So please check that out. But as for now, let's jump into the podcast where we're going to talk about all things trauma, all things growing up, not knowing your dad, not understanding what it means to be a dad, trying to figure out what manhood and masculinity looks like when you got no models growing up. So let's just jump into this conversation. Here's Micheal Miller. Micheal Miller, welcome to Unbreakable, the Fight Podcast. Normally I have Nikki on here. It's just you and I today, but I'm glad you could be here to talk about all of your deepest traumas and expose them to the entire world. I'm so glad you said yes to that. I appreciate it. Actually, we just want
to be fair, I said yes to the podcast, and then you told me I was going to be sharing all my childhood trauma. So
yeah, that makes, honestly, let's be honest, that makes a lot of sense. Usually that's on brand for me.
I'm here for it though. I'm here for it.
Actually, I'm just super glad you're doing it. Micheal has been an amazing friend of mine. We have, out of all my friends, I mean, we really only have a couple of the guys that we've been friends for a super long time, but we've done pretty much everything together, from ministry to business to travel to just friendship. Like, we've pretty much done it all. Lots of ups and downs, and we're still in it.
That's right.
Well, before we even begin, I say this, but I want to be able to say it publicly. I'm just really grateful for you. And I'm grateful for you always jumping in. You've been an insanely good friend. And honestly, if one thing I can share with men is, find friends like this. Like, these are the kind of friends you want to have, that you want to do life with, that you don't want to just say, let's do life together. You actually want to do stuff together in life. So as we jump in though, I wanted to focus on a couple things, but first let's talk about I want to talk about your growing up, just to give people perspective. I've heard your story. We've done a lot of story work even together, and we've been in a group together of men that just ended a little bit ago, but we were doing lots of really deep story work. So we've done some of this before, but why don't you catch people up? I just want to talk about relationship to dad, bio dads, stepdads, just give us a little synopsis, catch us up a little bit so that we could jump in and have a conversation about a little bit of that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, just to give a little bit of context. So my story's my family tree is kind of messy. As a matter of fact, when you aggregate all of the family dynamics, I think I figured out one time that I've got 34 aunts and uncles,
oh my God.
Direct aunts and uncles.
Yeah.
So our family dynamic is by traditional standards, a disaster. But it's actually had a lot of beauty in the process. So my mom was adopted, basically at birth. I was legally adopted, which I'll talk about, but then I met my bio dad when I was 15, 16. And then my mom met her bio mom. And then later on, 10, 15 years later, she met her bio dad. And so it's literally the whole family situation just kept growing and growing and growing. And so just a little context, so my mom had me when she was 15, teen mom. Well, I think she had me when she was 16. She got pregnant when she was 15, teen mom. And my bio dad just wasn't in the picture. He kind of bounced out pretty much right away. And so it was just me and my mom. And it was that way. There's a great story I'll tell some other time around that whole thing, but really it was me, my mom, and then her adoptive parents. And I've often said, my grandpa, my mom's adoptive dad, was essentially my father, through the majority of my early life, even after my mom got remarried. But that was my early years. It was my mom and I, and, but because also I should tell you, just to complicate the story, My mom's adoptive parents divorced shortly after they adopted her. So,
Wow.
so there was more fragmentation, more mess. But really my grandpa, my mom's dad, really was my father figure. And so then my mom got married when I was probably 4 or 5. And the man she married legally adopted me when I was not long after that, 5 or 6. So it's a little unusual because I'm technically adopted. Miller comes from my adoptive side, but I grew up with my biological mom and my adoptive dad. So that was the kind of dynamic there. Well, stuff got rough, things hit the fan, life happened, whatever. My mom and my adoptive dad, who I considered my dad, they split when I was about 15 or 16.
Okay.
At the exact same time, I met my bio dad.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of a crazy story because I actually wrote a letter to my bio dad when I was 13 for the first time.
Can you tell us about that? Like, can you tell us about that? Not, you don't have to go into too much detail. But
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I was curious, right? Like my mom, the thing that was cool about my mom is my mom only ever spoke highly of my bio dad.
Wow.
Like she always told me stories of like this amazing man and like, yeah, he chose not to stick around for whatever reason or whatever the dynamics were, right? Like everybody's got their side of the story, but my mom never hated on him ever. And so I had this like picture of him, I think from a young age of like this guy who was probably pretty legit, but like just was too young to be a dad or whatever. So I wrote him my first letter. I think it was 12 or 13. And I was curious. And my adoption, if you know anything about the adoption world, my adoption was what they call considered a partially open adoption, which meant that I was allowed to pursue him. Like I could go to the agency and get information to contact him, but he wasn't allowed to come and find me. So I was closed to him, but he was open to me, if that makes sense.
Wow. Okay. Well, it just doesn't,
so,
it makes it really, really simple with zero complications.
Right. Yeah. And so adoptions are either open, closed, or partially, right? And so I at 12 or 13 said, "Hey mom, I'd love to meet my dad. Like it's, I've got questions, I've got all these things." So I drafted up a letter. My mom called the agency and got his contact information. And I sent him a letter. And he replied almost right away, of course. And the letter was very kind and very, understanding. But basically, he was saying, "Hey, look," in the letter, he said something to the effect of, "Hey, look, like I've got young kids." He told me a lot about like his story and where he's been and all, a little bit about his life. And then he kind of closed it and said, "Hey, we're not in a place in our life where I am ready to bring you in or to have a relationship with you. But I would love to continue to write letters," was how he originally responded. And, in hindsight, I still have these letters, by the way.
Wow.
And in hindsight, you look at these letters and I'm like, I get it. Like he was still pretty young. I mean, he was younger at the time than I am today. He was in his 20s, and he's got 2 or 3 kids and a wife and a life. And out of the blue, he gets a letter from this kid who he obviously knew existed, but wasn't necessarily preparing to interact with on any given day. And so like as an adult now, I can empathize, but as a 12 or 13-year-old kid, I was like, "Hey man, screw you. Like, I'm not interested in like, listen, I don't need pen pals are for prisoners. Like, I'm not interested in being your like." So I wrote him, and he would even tell you, like, I wrote him this scathing letter in response that basically said, "Screw you," in my 13-year-old rhetoric, like, "Screw you. I'm done. I'm not interested in being your pen pal. Have a nice life." And so he proceeded to write me letters like pretty regularly.
Wow. Okay.
For like, gosh, several years. He would write 2 or 3 times a year and send me photo. And there would be photos of his family in there and all these things. And he was trying to be connected, but I was so uninterested. And he was so dead to me at that point that I literally threw the letters in the garbage. I never even opened them. Well,
wow.
What I didn't know is that my mom was collecting them all along the way. And so fast forward, I'm 15 years old. the family that I know now, right? My adoptive dad,
Yeah.
my mom, my two siblings, our life is imploding. My parents are splitting up. All this craziness is happening. We're losing our family home. Like there's a whole bunch of craziness ensuing. And I remember I was standing on the front steps of our house, and my mom says, "Hey, somebody's on the phone for you." And I was like, "Oh, okay, whatever." I pick up the phone and he goes, "Hey, this is your dad. This is Don. I'm your biological father." And I was pissed because my mom
Wow.
had basically reached out to him in the mess of our lives and been like, "Hey, if there were ever a time for you to show up, like this would be it. Like if there were ever an opportunity for you to like be a support to your son, like this is it." Just knowing that our life was falling apart.
Yeah.
So long story long, we ended up talking for like an hour and a half that day. Um, I ended up meeting him not long after that. But it was the whole thing was such a whirlwind. I literally met him, his wife, and his three kids all at the same time.
Okay.
At a McDonald's
But
near
how
our
did so
house.
you went from the phone call to going? You were like pissed on the phone call, and
I
then
was
how
pissed when I was pissed because I felt betrayed. Like I felt set up. I was
by your
pissed at my
mom?
mom.
Okay,
Yeah.
got
But
it.
the call went brilliantly. Like it was awkward. I remember it being
Of course.
awkward, but it was like, I don't know. I mean, call it the Lord, call it divine, whatever it was. But like there was an immediate sense of like, we should explore this, you know?
Wow.
And so we did. And it was overwhelming and exciting. And we literally met. And the even crazier, weird part was when I met him, I found out that he had been living like maybe 2 miles from me for like 5 years.
Wow. Are you serious?
Dude, it was wild, like literally wild. He was around. We lived on this road called Seattle Hill Road, and he lived literally up off of Cathcart, which was just, literally a couple of miles away.
Was that intentional, or is that just
No,
he didn't know and
no,
you
because
didn't know?
my adoption was close to him. He didn't know anything about me or where I was.
That is wild.
Super wild. My grandparents, my biological grandparents on
Yeah.
the other side, Mill Creek, 5 minutes away. My aunts and uncles literally down the street. Like we were all living in the same community and didn't even know it. Had I not been so much older than all of my like cousins and my half brother and
Yeah, yeah.
sisters, we all would have been in school together.
Dang. Like
Yeah.
that, how now looking back on that story, just saying it out loud, that like again, God, providence, divine, like there is something strange about the fact that they just existed so close, yet could have been living on a different planet. I mean, they could have all
Well,
moved to Colorado.
to
You know,
make
I mean,
it
they could have gone anywhere.
Well, and to make it weirder, they did. When I was first born, they moved to like I think they moved to like Virginia or something. I can't remember for sure. But then they ended up in Chicago because my grandpa is still and was a very successful businessman. And so he moved for work, and they moved to like several different states over what would have been my early years of life. And so the fact, not only did they move across the country and end up back in Washington, but they ended up back within a rock's throw of me and my family.
Wow. Okay, so
Wild.
you go. I have so many questions. You go to the meeting. You're hanging out with him. You're meeting his whole family for the first time. It's like this.
Yeah, I'm meeting him, his wife, and his three kids. His youngest, my brother, my half brother, his youngest was just a baby. He was in a like a
Wow.
baby carrier, and the kids played in the McPlay place, and we sat and kind of hung out. Like the crazy part is such a core memory, obviously. Like I remember the shoes I was wearing. Like it's that burned in my brain, and it was all of the feels. It was exciting, it was terrifying. It was I felt like known, and yet still so alone. Like there was just so many emotions I remember, but I remember it so vividly. Like I remember like the getting out of the car. I remember the interaction between him and my mom, because my mom drove us there. Like I
Wow.
remember every detail. I remember what I ate. Like it's that like that vivid in my brain.
Wow.
Um, it's funny actually, stupid side note. I remember what I ate because I order I'm kind of a picky eater, so I don't like condiments and stuff on my hamburgers and stuff, and I didn't want to be difficult. So I remember intentionally ordering chicken nuggets so that I didn't have to explain that I didn't want condiments or any, like I was so like very like so insecure, I guess, about the
Yeah.
whole thing that I just didn't want to be difficult.
Gosh,
So
Michael, that's wild. Keep going and we'll catch up. I have a couple
So
questions.
yeah, so fast forward, again, remember the context of this is my life that I've known growing up is exploding around me,
Yeah.
right? My parents are a disaster. We're moving out. We got shoved into a 2-bedroom apartment from this beautiful custom home my parents built. Like, so our life is falling apart. And meanwhile, I'm in rapid speed getting to know this brand new family that I didn't realize was so insanely big. And
Wow.
so I met him. It was just a couple of months later, I met my bio grandparents, his
Yeah.
parents. And then literally like a month or two after that, I was at their house for Thanksgiving.
What?
And I met also like in a 6-month period, probably, and I may have the timeline a little mixed up,
No,
but
no,
like
no.
in 6 months, I went from pissed off that my mom set me up to have this call to in a living room with like 30 relatives that I'd never met.
And how did they treat
Um,
you? How was that interaction with them
they,
and you?
they were amazing. That family, I could cry thinking about it, but um, they've got their own mess and their stuff, but they're
Of
beautiful
course.
people. And so I just remember feeling like super overwhelmed, but not because they did anything overwhelming. Like I was just overwhelmed with like how immediately I felt like connected to them,
Would you say
and
it was the first time because it's biological, because it's dad and it's the extension on this side? I mean, do you feel like there was a sense this is the first time I feel seen and I have nothing, I don't have to take, describe the condiments and all that stuff. I feel like I am welcomed just for who I am.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if I remember having like that much awareness of
Well,
like
yeah,
what
you're
I
a
was.
teenager.
Yeah, I know I'm 16. I think I just remember going like, I think I just remember feeling the sense of like, this is my new normal. Like
Wow.
I'm gonna have to figure out how to do life with these people. And I didn't know what that meant, but I guess what was so clear to me was that they were all in. Like that was the clear point to me, is they weren't like, hey, let's meet and see how this goes, or like we hope that this kind of works out. It was literally like I showed up and they're like, my nephew, my grandson, my son is home. And in their way, they just brought me into their system. And by the way, their system was very foreign to me. Like they're a very affluent family. I mean, I remember on Thanksgiving, they had like this, I forget her name, I think it was Lene or something. They had this person that they bring in for holidays that does all the cleaning and serving and like all this. It was like, and we grew up like in a pretty like well-to-do house, but like they did life on a level that I was not used to. They had like the help literally like at the holidays. And so I was just like, holy crap, like what is this? Who are these people?
Wow.
And so yeah, I felt immediately connected. I remember they gave me a ride home in their convertible Volvo that they thought was, which was super cool. And like it was my uncle and my dad, and they just were really proud to like go on this little drive to take me home. And yeah, it was a really, looking back, it was a really beautiful experience.
Well, what's so interesting, me knowing you the way I have known you, it's when you go back and look at like, okay, your stepdad immediately adopts you. So it's like, this is not, you are immediately in. It's not like you're a side note. You're not the tack on to the family. You are immediately welcomed to the highest degree I can receive you,
Yeah.
legally, all of it. I'm doing that. Then immediately as you meet your dad, the same thing is extended to you. Like you are immediately in. So there's no like, there's like no passing go. You didn't have to earn anything. It is like you are in again. And I wonder, as your friend, I watch you do that constantly. And so I'm wondering how much you learned by going, do you find yourself constantly going, I want to make people, maybe it's not, and a logical connection until we're having this conversation, but for you,
Sure.
do you feel like I want to make sure people feel that way?
Oh, I would say so. I mean, I'm always painfully aware of the person in the room who clearly doesn't feel connected.
Yeah.
Like I'm always like that's, we've joked about it. Like I can sometimes be the collector of misfits even.
Yeah.
Like I find myself, drawn to and wanting to give people home. And that's probably, I mean, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but um it's not even like a pursuit. It's just what we do. Like right. we want to create a space for the people that don't have spaces for themselves. Right. And I think that is what I've experienced in my life over and over and over again. I mean, I've always jokingly said that like I get seats at tables that I have no business having a seat at for reasons that are unknown to me, but I think that that's been the nature of my story.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is it started with dads, though. That's what's so interesting to me is it's like, this is the model of masculinity that I was given. This is what I'm going to do for others because it was done for me. I know what it's like to be adopted and be welcomed. I also know the pain of rejection, but because you watched your family go through it, you've watched the story, but also then immediately when you're in the throes of like, I mean, this is the age of initiation, right? So like we're talking 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. You're in the throes of, I need a man to tell me what to do and how to be a man. And the model you got was bio dad shows up like you have a hunger, which just FYI, like for anybody listening, like you're going to get a hunger at 10, 12, 13, 14. You're going to get a hunger for fatherhood. If you do not have it, you are going to begin to long for it in a way that you have not previously known. And if there is no opportunity for you to be able to get it, you are actually going to turn to violence. You are going to turn to anger. And we've watched it a ton. And whatever violence means in your life, that could be violence towards yourself through addiction and all these things, or it could be outward with anger and aggression and all that stuff that we know that we need dads to show up. And you sent him a letter at the age of initiation, like right in that pocket. And this dude shows up and goes, I'm going to keep writing you. You told me you hate me, and I'm going to keep writing. Like you can't actually get rid of me.
That's so crazy you say it because I never really actually thought of it that way. Like I always thought of it as like, it's so interesting because again, I'm looking at it, and it's not that you explain away the emotion of a 12-year-old. Obviously, I felt rejected by him when I was 12 or 13. But looking at it now as a dad in my life, trying to put myself in his lens, it is fair for him to go, hey, I kind of need a minute to like figure this out. I wasn't ready for this.
Right.
But to your point, I had never even, the continual writing of the letters, I had never even seen as an ongoing pursuit. Like, because you got to remember, I shut it off. Like in my mind, it was gone. And now looking back on it, going like, that just touches me in a new way because I'm like, you're right. He had to draw a personal boundary for whatever reason, right, wrong, or indifferent, doesn't matter. But his response wasn't, no, I'll call you when I'm ready. His response was, I just blocked my camera and now it wants to move around. Sorry. His response was, hey, give me a minute, but I'm going to keep leaning in no matter what you say about it, because now you've opened the door. And that's the other thing that's crazy. I had never considered this was my letter to him was the first open door.
Yep.
Because he didn't have the open door before. And so what he did with the open door is actually really beautiful.
Well, I think so many men, I think so many men are looking for, I need to do the giant heroic thing. Like, okay, so
Wow.
now I'm going to show up to my son's life and this is what's going to happen. And then we're going to Disneyland and then I'm going to be involved every day. And then it's like to have, it's so hard for men to recognize that if you just do the small thing really well, that actually pays off big dividends long term. And for him, he knew I can't do the big thing. And right, wrong, and indifferent. Again, to say that to you when you were 12 is like, screw you, but like, but
Right.
trying to rehash it now because I'm watching you extending the same kindnesses in your own life, you looking for misfits, you making a way, but having like, you always go above and beyond, but you also, in many ways, you have very similar boundaries to go like, hey, I can do this now, but I can do this later. Hey, I can do this. It's again, what we're trying to teach most men is just under promise and over deliver. And he did that. He said, I can't do this right now, and kept writing, even though you said, I'm done with you, you can die.
Which is so great. I mean, we've talked about this a gazillion times, you and I, and I've never even seen it this way. Like it is another, I mean, he was an amazing man in general.
Yeah.
And so I look at this and I'm like, yeah, I get it. There was pain, but the pursuit, I don't know. I guess I'm just experiencing the goodness of those small gestures in a new way, even as we're talking about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I guess that's part of it, is like encouraging men to like, listen, you can't do the heroic thing every time. That's not actually really healthy.
No, and to be honest, like my adoptive dad, who I grew up with, I learned a lot from him. He was, unfortunately, we don't have a relationship anymore.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot from him. He was amazing in his own right and had his junk in his own right. But what I would say is, as something that I've observed from my siblings who still do have relationship with him, is that he tends to be the heroic guy. And the crazy part is that the kids in the environment don't care. They're like, look, I don't care about the heroic, the big fancy whatever. Like, I just want you. And I think a lot of times those not being able to self-regulate and manage and go, I can't be a hero because I want to be whole for you. We trade, I think a lot of guys trade that in for like the big, I'm going to be the hero.
Well,
And I think
yeah.
the point you're making is like, that's actually not what we're looking for.
I don't think any kid, I mean, genuinely, to a kid, I guess the way I look at it is, we know psychologically in a child's brain, there have been studies on this, that the same thing that causes us to grieve during someone we love's death is the same part of the brain that fires when a kid can't get to the cookies on the shelf. Right. So that's the same, it's literally the same part of the brain. So what I'm trying to make in the opposite direction is, what we as an adult go, I need a vacation to Hawaii for 7 days in order to make this like an actual vacation. The kids are like, will you take me to McDonald's and play with me? Will you take me to the park and go on the swings with me? And the same part psychologically that we as adults have matured into, they don't need the big expression. They just need a letter from dad that says, hey, I'm still here. Throw it in the garbage if you want. Totally fine. You don't have to receive it, but I just want to let you know I'm here. And I think that feels way more accessible to, like, I guess we keep writing all these books and have all this stuff for fatherhood that's like, take your kids camping and then go out and take them and do this. And then you've got to put together 25 groups. And it's all like, actually, you could really just take them to breakfast and they would be really, really pumped.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, even if I've got a 3-year-old now daughter, it's her birthday today, actually.
Oh.
And yes, go Everly, 3 years old. It's crazy. But my favorite thing she's figuring out right now is that she gets to date dad. And we've been trying to create these rhythms, and it's fun and it's cute and all of the things that we love to go, oh, that's so cute. But what's honestly so impactful to me that I'm realizing is, it's like sometimes now I'll literally take her to go run an errand just because I have to, and it's inconvenient and it's annoying to pull her in and out of the car seat just to go grab a letter, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But she's starting to say these things where, like, we'll come back from running an errand that was like kind of inconvenient for me to have her, and she'll get in the house and she'll run up to mom and she'll go, daddy took me on a date. We went on a date. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I could have missed the opportunity to date my daughter and give her just this little bit of connection had I let my annoyance with pulling her in and out of the car seat to go run a quick errand prevent me from bringing her along. And I think
Right.
that
And
those are the things that you're talking about.
yeah, because there's no reason not to take them except for our own personal annoyance, which by the way, we won't have for very long.
Yeah.
Like these things, like my teenagers are 16, my daughter's 19, going to be 19. My sons are 16 and 14. And I'm like, dude, people tell you this goes by quick and you have no idea how quick it goes by. But the point is am I able to invest in the little way, going on like a little tiny drive with dad? Even the crazy part is you just said that was something in your story that they were pumped on. Like your dad and your uncle were like, this is a date. This is quality time. Doing this matters. And it's like, we have those opportunities. You don't need to be a millionaire to do that. You need to like have thought. You need to have forethought to take your kids wherever you're going so that they can see them like they can see you do life in a very real way, interacting with people and bringing them into it.
Yeah. And I think that just to wrap that thought up, I think that like, as I'm thinking through my life and my upbringing, like if your ecosystem was built on hype and like built on the big hero adventures, you're naturally going to want to translate that into your operating system today. Right. And I think that's a little bit me is like, I can't envision going to the grocery stores this deeply impactful time with my daughter, but I have to relearn that because if I don't, that's what I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss those moments. And at the end of the day, Disneyland or Hawaii or whatever is cool. But the things I'm going to remember is when she ran in and goes, Daddy took me on a date, Mommy. And I didn't even catch it,
Right. Yeah, it's so stunning. And so when did your mom give you the letters? At what point did you know those letters were kept?
After the phone call. So after that first phone call, she came in and gave me this pile of letters. And I don't remember. I'd have to think about it. I don't remember if I opened them immediately or not, because I still felt I was still wrestling through a lot. Yeah. Obviously.
That makes sense.
But I can tell you like my bio dad, just a little context, my bio dad passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, which is a whole nother super painful loss because it's like I got something back and then lost it again.
Yeah.
But I can tell you one of the things that has been really I guess encouraging or beautiful for me is that I can go back and look at those letters now. And so that's the thing. I don't remember when I read them or when I opened them, but I can tell you that I've gone back to them as an adult a number of times to just be reminded of this guy who did pursue me when he didn't know any better way.
God dang, man. And again, it's like, I don't know, we'll wrap up this thought, but I'm just continually impressed that it's that reminder to just do the small things. Like these are things that men can do right now. Go write your kid a letter. Like just tell them how much you love them, put it in an envelope and tell them they can't open it for 20 years. You know what I mean? Like even if it's intentional, you know what I mean?
I have this, I'd show it to you, but my camera's sitting on it right now. I started doing this thing. I have a journal and I just wrote Everly's name at the top of it. And my original intention, because I wanted to be a hero, was I'm going to write her a letter a day for the first year of her life. And then I quickly felt like all the guilt and shame when it had been like 2 weeks and I didn't do anything.
Yep, you're screwed.
But yeah, I'm screwed. Screw it. She's going to be messed up and like, whatever. But then when I finally like got smart and realized like I can be kind to myself and the gesture, I turned it into what I'm calling a life journal, where I'm writing to her as often as I feel or can remember to. No pressure, no timeline, no series or calendar. And I'm just writing her letters of what I'm experiencing with her at this stage in her life. And it's just a journal. And I'm literally so it's normally 1 page. And it's like, today this happened and this is the experience. And then I'll just cap it off with like, I'm so insanely proud of you. And my hope, my like fairy tale hope is that I can give it to her on her wedding day.
Yeah.
Which all of a sudden makes me want to cry too, because I can't fathom her getting married. But but those are my little gestures right now, is going like, to your point, I have to be kind to myself, because I want to beat myself up over the fact I haven't written in this thing in 3 months.
Right.
But when she's 20 years old, 25 years old, and I give her this thing, like, it's not going to matter that there's 6-month gaps in it. She's going to go, wow, dad thought of me all along the way.
It amazes me. That's what's so beautiful, I guess, about life in general, is that I think I heard Jordan Peterson say this at one point. He talked about it. It's amazing to me. And he's like, psychiatrist, the whole thing. And he's like, it is amazing how little encouragement a human needs to continue to move forward.
Wow.
It is amazing psychologically how little encouragement they need. They actually just get even less than that, which is why it's so hard. And so there is something really stunning about going, I'm going to be intentional for my kids and for my family in the smallest ways possible. And like you just said, is the best. Like, I love that you said it that way, because when she gets married or she gets older and she's given this stuff, she's not going to care. She's going to go, this was intentional. My dad was intentional. And that, like, intentionality, that's a game changer. That is a huge game changer. And when you, so you have met your bio family, you have all this going on. Your dad, like, at that point, what's the story with you guys? Did he work at the bank and then you worked at the bank, or how did that all happen?
Yeah. So it was actually my uncle that worked at the bank.
Okay.
So it wasn't my dad. But the crazy part of this whole deal was, you think, like, there's natural things, like we look the same, like the funny thing, like the obvious stuff, like it's creepy how similar we look, like I used to always joke, like, great, I look like the goofball or whatever, but like, those are the obvious things. Like, you meet your bio family and you're like, wow, like, or like stupid stuff. Like, we both got ingrown toenails, and like that was a problem, like a thing that we both had. But all of those little things actually meant a lot to me, because it was the first time I felt connected to a father that way. And I used to always joke, because it was like always all the bad things that I felt like I inherited, like ingrown toenails and like heartburn. And I'm like, am I going to get any good stuff, But the crazy part about it was when we started to identify things that you would have never expected to be like genetic or DNA or hereditary or passed down, like silly stuff. Like, we both put ketchup on everything. Like, the weirdest thing ever. Like, and my half sister on his side does the same thing. They literally used to joke, they'd give me my own little like container of ketchup with like any meal that I had over there, because they knew that I liked ketchup like my dad did. And so, like, weird stuff like that, to the fact that, like, he was a public figure, he was a communicator, he was his love for animals. I grew up loving animals. I've always been an animal lover. My dad was the director of the Seattle Animal Shelter and one of the national spokespeople for the Humane Society. So not only do we have this connection through our love of animals, which is so weird, but like he was a public leader, he was a communicator, like all these things that I've become in my life, or was already even doing. Then I met my uncle, who was a banker. My history is a banker. My other uncle owns a financial firm as a financial advisor. That's my background. So like, there's all this. My grandfather's an entrepreneur and businessman, and like all of these people in my direct like blood lineage ecosystem had lived the life of the person I was becoming at a young age, before we ever got the opportunity to really even know each other. And like, they helped nudge that along the way. It was my uncle that like really pushed me because Bank of America pursued me when I was like 18. They came. I was working at Car Toys selling car stereos and cell phones, and
Yeah.
I sold a stereo to who was the market executive at the time, and he pursued me for months. And it was
Wow.
actually my uncle, who's an executive for Wells Fargo, who I was telling him about. I was like, dude, this guy won't leave me alone. And my uncle's like, you're an idiot. Like, do you want to sell car stereos for the rest of your life, or do you want to build a career? And he was the one that propelled me in there. But the crazy part about it is, like, I got in there and found it wasn't a job. Like, I got into it and it was who I was intended to be. I
Yeah.
was so successful from such a young age with no education. It didn't make any sense except for the fact that it was in my wiring. It was where I came from, and I got to inherit all this crazy stuff without ever being brought up in the environment.
Right. And
It's
that's
even funnier too. Sorry,
no,
it's even
please.
funnier because all of the other siblings, I've got 3 half siblings on that side.
Yeah.
They're all going the education and, like, kind of the educated route. 2 of them are becoming teachers. One of them's becoming a doctor. That was my stepmom. My stepmom has been in the education space. I'm on the other side in, like, the entrepreneurial finance business side. And so it's just, even that is weird. They were raised in the environment and they caught one side and I caught another. It's just
Well, and
so
you'd be the
bizarre.
oldest son.
I am, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is what's wild about it is you can't escape, like, the biblical narrative of firstborn blessing, all of these things. It's just in your wiring. I mean, my dad, all he wanted to do was be a speaker and be a communicator and be in front of people and this whole thing. And he was an electrician. And he was like, he knew, and by the way, at a young age, my dad wanted to be a designer. But my
No way.
grandpa was like, that's for sissies. You're going to be a hardworking white, I mean, you're going to be out there in blue collar. And my dad, like, had to let go of all that stuff. And it's
Wow.
just, I didn't know any of those stories when I was 12 years old, 14 years old, doing design stuff,
14
starting
girls.
airbrushing, being my own business. But, like, you and I are both the oldest sons. Like, there is something about the lineage that's passed down that has nothing to do with what you've been trained for and everything to do with what is in your family line. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I are both great examples of this, because, like, I barely graduated high school. Like, it was a few years into my career where I was leading and managing people with MBAs. I used to get in environments with these executives, and they'd all want to talk about their alma mater and their frat days and what Ivy League they came from. And I'm like, ooh, I barely graduated, like, a year late from Edmonds Community College.
how
Like,
did you respond to that? Like, what was there? You're in these meetings, you're with these executives, these guys, they have the education. You're essentially doing the same job, right?
in a lot of cases, yeah. In a lot of cases, or close
How are
to
these
it.
men responding to you in that space?
Well, to be honest with you, I got really good at dodging it. So,
Okay.
like, I did not go out of my way to, like, convey how little education I had.
Yeah.
The cool thing for me in my career is that results spoke for themselves. So it was a very result driven culture, and I was good at getting results. But I will say this: there was one man in particular that I attribute 90% of my career success to, and it's a guy named Roger, who was a leader and one of those executives at the time, who continued to take risk on me, knowing that I was younger than everybody else and that I had less educational background and less experience than everybody else. But for whatever reason, he believed in me. And it's another, to be honest, like, I mean, it's professional. I wouldn't have ever said this to him, but it was another father to me. Like, he showed up and took risks on me, and I produced results that validated that he made the right bet. And so that was how I kind of got through it. So no, it wasn't ever like, oh, hi, I'm like the high school graduate. It was like, oh, and I dodged the question, get out of there quick, but as people found out, like, I never felt I had to work harder for less money, I feel like, in my early years, because I didn't have the credentials. But at the end of the day, like, once I got into these things, it really was results driven, which, to that point, comes from the fact that I believe it's in my DNA.
Yep.
I believe I got something by inheritance that I couldn't have earned through credentials. And the funniest part about it is, you know who the biggest advocates were for me to go back to school and to get a degree?
Who?
My biological family. They
Wow.
pressed me hard to go because that's what they all did.
Right.
And I respect it and I love it. It just wasn't right for me.
Yeah.
But the funniest part about it is I don't even think they fully realize that I got by inheritance what they worked for by credential.
Wow. Wow. There's so much in there because I guess the way I want to turn it a little bit is going like, we both get the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to wrestle through both sides, like I on my side was totally different than your side, but I'm going like, for me, like it wasn't just that, oh crap, I got all this stuff by like lineage that was in my family line, stuff that I didn't even find out for years later, which, I mean, my dad found a article on my great grandma, and she was talking about her great grandfather saying that he was a Baptist preacher, that his dad was a Baptist preacher, and that there was their hope was that one day there would be Methodist preachers in their line, like basically very in love with the word, going to preach the word, and hopefully some people will be filled with the Spirit and preach in the Spirit and all these things. And it was like so wild that we didn't know any of that existed. I thought like I was the first pastor preacher in our entire line. Turns out I'm like the seventh, and so for us, but on the other side of that, I get my dad, who's like a massive workaholic. So it's like I end up like I'm gonna drive everyone away, push everyone away, and like not knowing until my own marriage goes through its own fracturing and its own stuff, to go like, oh crap, this is a problem. What were some of the things for you that weren't the positive that came in through that same way?
Well, I would say, so the hard part about this, and one of my I don't know if I call it regrets, but just one of the missed opportunities for me is that I don't know that I ever really got the opportunity to see fully behind the curtain, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like, cause you got to remember, like, first of all, my dad, my bio dad, had a tremendous amount of regret and shame for the fact that he didn't get to know me in my early years.
Wow.
And he didn't, I don't think we talked about it very rarely, but it did come up a couple of times. And I don't think he ever fully recovered from that. Like, I don't know if he ever knew what to do. And so part of what was hard was that a lot of our relationship felt like making up for lost time. And so we didn't spend a lot of time digging into, like, we talk a lot about, like, your parents' ceiling is your floor and all this stuff. And like, where did you, I didn't get that look. So I have some thoughts and some ideas on some things that I think were maybe some of his struggles, or some things that maybe I can even see have translated into my life. But I don't know if it would be fair for me to like unilaterally assign them to him, because I never got that opportunity.
Wow.
But what I do know is that my dad wrestled with the shame of not having me in his life from the beginning.
Wow.
And if I know anything well in my life, it's the effect of shame.
And what's that look like? What do you mean by that?
To me, shame is one of the biggest root systems of all of our unhealthy behavior. To me, the system of shame, the design of shame is to convince me that I do not belong or deserve to be connected to anything healthy. That's, to me, the lie of shame. The lie of shame says, if I'm designed to be in this inner circle or this inner relationship or this inner connection, shame comes in and says that thing is better off without you. So in the picture of my dad, I feel like some of the distance that we didn't get to bridge before he passed away had a lot to do with the fact that he didn't believe he deserved to have deep connection with me.
Wow.
Because of the shame of what he had chosen to give up. Now, I would have loved to have gone even deeper and deeper and deeper, right?
Yeah.
But shame robbed, I believe that shame robbed us of some of that connection. And I believe shame is a bigger killer than we give it credit for, because I think what shame also forces us to do is medicate our hurt with other outlets. And that's where the dysfunctional behavior comes from. I'm so ashamed. I'm disconnected. So I've got nobody telling me that I'm going to be okay. And I've still got all this pain. So I'm going to go find another way to make that pain not so painful. And I think those are the cycle, at least in my experience, like when I can say that firsthand, things that I'm most ashamed of are the things that are cyclical patterns of sin or dysfunction in my life, because it's the cycle. I do it, I feel better, I'm ashamed of it. I do it, I feel better, I'm ashamed of it. And it just continues in the circle. And so to me, like, I think shame was a big one that I got. You know, I think also possibly some hiddenness. You know, I don't know that he was allowed to be fully transparent all the time. You know, they have my family is very prestigious, very prominent, and very put together. They're a very impressive family, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of them, and they're proud of themselves. But sometimes I wonder if that type of culture where especially him, he was a public figure. So I wonder sometimes if that type of culture where you're always being seen and you're always having to produce and look a certain way, limited his ability to be fully honest with just the struggles of life. And I resonate with that deeply, because there's stuff in my life that I go, gosh, I don't want people to find out about that. But the funniest thing about it is, the more open you are about your drama and trauma and crap, the more you find out that everybody else has the same stuff.
I mean, in all honesty, that's been one of the best parts about like even doing the men's stuff, is like you're sitting in a room. I mean, we've done story work enough to go like, where everyone walks into the room going, great, I'm going to tell everybody this, and then they're going to hate me, and they're not going to hate me. They're just going to think differently of me. They're going to treat me differently because I'm going to bring this story, or they're going to see me differently. And every single time, without fail, when done in the containment that we provide, whether it's a fight weekend or even our Wednesday night group that we were doing, it's like, it is without fail the kindest, most merciful place. And I would say this, because I mean, and you tell me, you've been in these rooms, so you can tell me your experience. But for me, I'm going like, I've said it 1,000 times, because men are like, well, how do I break the cycle? Because there's tons and tons of like, you know, books on this stuff. And like, and I'm not a professional. Clearly, I'm not a professional at this. But what I have found is grief provides the open door for the lack that is the root system for the shame that you're now feeling. And the things that because the things that shame allows in, shame and guilt, the things that you're talking about, where there's cyclical behaviors, there's disconnection, there's medicating, all the stuff. When I look at the reason I feel that way, and I just allow myself to grieve it, it begins a process that breaks the cycle for us to be able to see ourselves and our story rightly. And I say it 1,000 times, which you've heard me say, is like, you know, we get into the Beatitudes in scripture and we're like, oh, it says, blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted. And if you're not going to get comfort, you have to grieve and mourn in order to get comforted. If you don't grieve and mourn, you will settle for the closest comfort. And when you settle for the closest comfort, that's what creates the cycle. So now I'm in a cycle of, I'm trying to make sure I'm comforting myself, because I'm bypassing the fact that what actually happened to me sucked and it hurt. And you're just even using your dad as an example. It's like, no, it sucks. Like wasn't there. And instead of grieving it, it puts cycles, which brings in hiddenness, which brings in more shame, and it compounds. Does that make sense? Have you seen that?
It makes total. Oh, 1,000%. I mean, I'll share even more. Like, the first time this became super real to me was in my little kitchen nook with you. When we started the conversation about story work and how important it is to tell stories. And you were telling me kind of this context you were exploring with other people. And I don't know why or what, but like all of a sudden I'm like, well, let me tell you a story. And I ended up at the time way oversharing, but sharing with you some stories from my early childhood where I was sexually abused and had some pretty horrible experiences, but I was telling them through the lens of guilt. And I remember, and I was using it like, and it ultimately, you asked me this question: how are you dealing with these stories? Because what it was, just for context, is I had these suppressed memories that came out in a counseling session of childhood abuse where I was sexually abused as a child.
Yeah.
And I was sharing that with you. And then, not expecting to even deal with today, I was just telling you the story.
Yeah.
You're like, cool.
Yeah.
So like, what are you doing with that now? I'm like, what do you mean? And you're like, well, you're getting comfort somewhere. How are you coping with this?
Right.
And then I had to like pour my heart out to go like, these are the areas of dysfunction in my life that have been ongoing issues for me, right? Since long, even high school and younger,
Yeah.
but are still deals. And I'm weeping and I'm having it. And I remember you asked me the question, like, does 5-year-old, like, can you look at 5-year-old Micheal and tell him it's not his fault? And at the time, I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. But what it did is it started the conversation for me to learn to go and be kind with to go and be kind to 5-year-old Micheal, and more importantly, to be kind to 35-year-old or 30-year-old Micheal at the time, to be able to go, my dysfunction and my behavior that I hate about myself today, right? Because we all know that feeling. We do the things we don't want to do. We don't do the things we want to do. Like, this has been happening since Paul and before. So,
Absolutely.
but the reality is, it was the first time I was able to, and it took me a long time to get to this statement. It was the first time I was able to go, my behavior today is not only not the problem, but it's not my fault. And the way that I solve it is I go back and I care for 5-year-old Micheal. I go back and I figure that kid out when he had these experiences that were put on him, not that he sought out. And no, it doesn't absolve me from decisions and disciplines and blah, 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 all the Christian
stuff. Yeah.
But the point is that it was this open door to go, we're trying to discipline our behaviors into freedom. And the answer is, we've got to go back and be kind to the kid that got messed up to begin with, because those behaviors are a result of him getting something stolen from him that was never supposed to be stolen.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're talking about to me is like, yeah, even that, like, coping, like, we look for comfort. All of our dysfunctional behaviors are a comfort grab, right?
Yes.
And that's what we're looking at. And so I say all of that to say, like, what you're talking about with the story work and how that whole thing goes, it's like, we got to recognize and be kind to ourselves first and foremost, to go, we're not messed up. We're not jacked because we've got these things that we've done or whatever. We've got a whole history of trauma that we haven't been able to look at yet. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, and it's so much of it is getting space to be able to do that. And we talked about it in terms of even just metabolizing, like being able to go, where does that go in your body? Like,
right.
No wonder a man is like, I'm not tired. It's no big deal. I'm fine. Like, I'm like, that's what every man, I'm like, we're just getting rid of 2 phrases. If we can get rid of 2 phrases, you will be much better off. It is, I'm fine, and it's no big deal. If I can get rid of those 2 phrases from my life, I can actually just practically start to absorb some of the smaller things in my life that I'm actually experiencing. And thank you for sharing it. It was like, for you, there was a whole lot that your 30-year-old body had been storing for years and had nowhere to put it. So it's just stuffed into this frail form that we've been given, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it, and no one's helping. They're just, like you said, giving us more, well, just discipline yourself in this way, discipline yourself in this way. You can't discipline yourself out of disconnection. That is an absolute impossibility. I cannot discipline myself out of disconnection. The only way to cure disconnection is ridiculously radical honesty. It's the cost is I have to be honest, and then I have to take responsibility. So,
And just to be clear for those listening, when you say disconnection, you mean literally disconnection with myself.
first with you. Yes.
That's
First with
that's
yourself.
the that was a crazy revelation to me, because I never knew that that was even an option or possible. like like disconnected from me. Like no wonder I'm messed up and I've got panic attacks and I've got anxiety and stress all the time. I got 5 and 6 and 7-year-old versions of myself that are pissed off because
Right.
they've been ignored my whole life. You say this all the time.
Right.
And I can tell you definitively, I can point to moments in time where 6-year-old Micheal came punching, and it's just, and it manifests today through all of these unhealthy behaviors.
Right. And that's, I mean, we could spend a whole other episode talking about that. That is for dang sure. Because there's so much there, because so many men and so many of us just trying to, man, if we go back to even what we said earlier, which is the bar is actually really low. We keep thinking of it in terms of perfection and heroism and all of these things. And I mean, the church phrase for it is holiness. Like we're just looking for this measure of holiness that I can live in, so God will finally be pleased with me, because my own dad wasn't. And like we were disconnected, and I don't want to have that disconnection with my Heavenly Father. So we figure out all these things. And the reality of it is the bar is really, really small for us to get the breakthrough we're actually looking for. The goal is not perfectionism. The goal isn't, Micheal, that didn't happen. Or, you know what, that's covered. That's okay. You're fine now. That's ancient history. No, the things that you experienced when you were a kid set you up to have really messed up things in our own heart that we still have to deal with, but also made you the way you are today in ways that you wouldn't be without those experiences.
Isn't that a freaking crazy thing? Like how I can literally sit here and go, God, I had some really, really shitty stuff happen to me.
Right.
But I also don't know if I can fully say that I would change it, because there's so much, that's he works everything together for good, that we don't talk about. That's if yes, it's terrible. And by the way, if you're listening to this, I think it's important to say, because a lot of people hear, this kind of harsh version of my story, and I say things like sexual abuse, and everybody's like, well, I didn't have that, so I'm good.
Yeah. I get to cop out. I'm out.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, and my camera freaked out again. The truth is that those are just some of the severe examples of trauma I've been unpacking.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have trauma that is manifesting today through coping mechanisms that involve things like being in the drive-thru and your dad saying, I can't afford that. There's a bazillion.
Right. And let's define it, because trauma is traumatic experience, not able to metabolize, self-blame. Everybody has traumatic experiences. So just to make this this is the non-professional Jake version of this. So please hear this. This is the non-educated Jake version of this. It's trauma happens and exists in your life. Stored trauma, when it goes from traumatic to trauma, is when I have a traumatic event in my life, something significant, and it can be even small, like you said. I go through a stop sign. We talk about it all the time in this way. We go through a stop sign. Somebody runs the red light. We almost get in an accident. We freak out. We yell. We scream at the person who's no longer there. We've metabolized it into our bodies. We feel okay. We drive away. It's a little shaky, but we feel it because we were able to metabolize it. It becomes traumatic in the sense that when I go from a traumatic event, let's just say you're in the car with your mom. I was in the car with my dad. My dad won't be mad that I shared this. We joke about it now because he's not this person. But I remember driving down the road and my dad chasing a dude who cut him off, to the point where he got out of the car at a stoplight and was going to fight this dude for cutting him off. That, then when if the dad was to get back in the car, if my dad got back in the car, because all of a sudden I'm traumatic event. I don't know what to do with this in my little body. Now, if he gets back in the car and yells at me because I distracted him, self-blame. So now a traumatic event goes from, hey, it's metabolized, that guy cut us off, screw that guy, I'm super pissed, it's okay, don't worry, everything's all right. Boom, traumatic event healed. Traumatic, oh crap, I don't know what to do with this in my little tiny body, my little 8-year-old body. I don't know what to do with this. And then dad comes and yells. It's locked in as a trauma because I did something to cause this in dad's life. And now I have this as a core memory that I have to deal with because I think this is who I am. This is who you are. And I hold this thing. That's just, and we're talking about something that's small. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you said, I can't afford this in the drive-through.
Exactly. And how that all carries all the way through. I mean, we have a friend, we have a mutual friend that has stories that he would not consider traumatic, that are financial traumas to him. I've been exploring this a ton because I'm coaching people on money, and I'm learning a lot about money mindsets and the psychology. But it's only been until a few years ago where he stopped going to the movie theater and pulling popcorn out of the garbage can to take it in as a snack. And I remember having an early conversation, him telling me about this, like this was a normal behavior. Like he had no grid that this was not like socially normal. But it's a, I mean, this is a very micro simple, and everybody listening to this goes, oh my God, you're getting food out of the garbage. His brain was rewired through trauma of a million micro instances to believe that this would be a perfectly acceptable behavior. And he's only now getting, healing and moving on. I think he's buying popcorn for himself now, but I mean, it's silly as it sounds. Like these are the experiences. I go through the drive-through. My dad says I can't afford it. I say, well, I want it anyways. He gets mad at me. And now I've got this thing that affects me all the way through the end of my life. And we have to be able to go back. And the really crappy part about this, at least for me, I don't know about you, Jake, the really crappy part of this for me is that it's exhausting. Because what you find is when you start to do this type of work, you have to go over and over and over again. And it's like, okay, cool. I worked through that piece. Like my dad could afford it or whatever, however you work through that. And then you remember another story about the stop sign. And then you remember another story. And this thing just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. But that's called manhood. Like being willing to show up and do the work. And that's what I'm learning. And I'm not good at it. And I got friends, thank God, that help me with it. And I've got therapists that, thank God, help me with it. But this work has just begun for me. And we've been doing this together for years. And so I don't say that to say it's hopeless. I say that to say that you're not alone, like we're all in this together forever and ever. It doesn't end. And that's actually really beautiful.
I think that's a good place to end. I think we'll end it here. And just like, I think that's the encouragement. Like, I really want people to be able to know, like, that, Micheal, like you sharing your story with us today and us being able to dive in this way and to have it come to closure in the sense of like, oh, by the way, I'm still in the midst of this. Like, I haven't done this for a handful of years and now I'm a professional. So therefore I've cleared out all my drawers and we're good. It's like, no, at the end of the day, like I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. And then I'm assuming, like, listen, my kids are just getting to the age. I am assuming that when my kids start to have kids, I'm going to help my kids unpack their stuff with me. And I'm going to be holding space and figuring out things I didn't even know I did that hurt, that I'm going to have to go back and unpack. And it is a lifelong journey.
I've jokingly said, I'm resolved to the fact that my kids are going to end up in counseling, complaining or blaming me for all the things I did wrong. My only hope is that it's for different stuff that I'm complaining to my therapist about.
Absolutely good.
That's my only hope.
Yep. And I love this I've been exploring even just the prodigal son thing. I think we've talked about it before. And I love the reality that a dad built such a beautiful home that even when his son was riddled with shame, he still knew he had a place to run back to. Like, let us build homes that regardless of which way our kids go, they know in their darkest moments, I can go home. Like that's how
That's really
good the dad actually built that space, the environment of that kind of home. And I want to be able to do that. And Micheal, I'm really grateful for your friendship, and I'm glad you were willing to do this with me, man. Seriously.
Heck yeah.
I appreciate
You know,
it.
I'm here for it, man. I love you. Appreciate what you're doing for men, and let's keep doing it together.
Sounds like a plan. Until next time.
All right. All right.